Hi, everyone. Thanks for your patience. We're just going to give it 2 more seconds so that people can join the room. Let me go ahead and introduce our speaker as she prepares her slides. Welcome to the Center on Democracy, Development, and the Rule of Law at Stanford University. This is our weekly seminar and where we explore different topics related to democracy and development. This week, we're going to highlight one of our research programs. We maintain many different active research programs, including a program on Turkey. The director of that program is Ayça Alemdaroğlu, a political sociologist who focuses on social and political inequality and change in Turkey and the Middle East. Her recent work examines youth politics and authoritarianism, particularly strategies of the Justice and Development Party, or AKP, in Turkey. Ayça has slides to show us. She'll speak for about 30 minutes. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And if you, and then we will make sure to reserve about 30 minutes at the end for Q&A. Ayça, whenever you're ready. Thank you.
Thanks, Didi. Thanks for the nice introduction and for this opportunity. For those who like to follow the program on Turkey, please join our mailing list on our webpage on cddrl.fsi.stanford.edu/program on Turkey. So in this talk, I want to examine the relationship between the university and authoritarianism. And my question is, what is the role of the university as an institution in the making and sustenance of authoritarian regimes? This is a new line of work for me. I've done some work on the higher education in Turkey, looking at the privatization aspect of it. And I've also done some work on authoritarianism with a focus on youth politics. This research aims to bring together what I've learned from those research tracks to think about the functions of the university in the context of authoritarianism. So my starting point, or puzzle, if you will, is the following. Increasing access to higher education is often seen as a threat to authoritarian regimes. The assumption is that authoritarian leaders do not want to increase access to higher education because educated people, trained in critical thinking with capacity to search, find and process information and use that information to form their ideas and political practices would eventually bring the end of autocrats. Therefore, authoritarian governments would limit access to universities to avoid the spread of anti-regime sentiments. And Turkey suggests an interesting case. The consolidation of the rule of the Justice and Development Party, the AKP, overlapped with an impressive expansion of higher education. As I start to think and form ideas for this paper, which I proposed back in November, the protest at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul began in the early days of 2021. On the New Year's Day, when probably many of us were trying to recover from the previous day, the President Erdogan announced his appointment of Dr. Melih Bulu as the new rector of Boğaziçi University. And this led to widespread protests and ongoing protests by students and faculty members. So for those who are not familiar with Boğaziçi, it's one of the most reputable higher education institutions situated on a hilltop overlooking the Bosphorus. And it's one of the, it's the oldest American college outside the United States, established in 1863. In 1971, the Board of Trustees passed a resolution to transfer the institution to the Turkish state to establish Boğaziçi as a public university. And on Monday, following the president's decision on Monday, January 4th, Boğaziçi students gathered in front of the university to press the president's decision. The faculty joined them later. They are still meeting on the Boğaziçi campus every day, sort of protesting by standing in front of the rector's office, by turning their back to the office. And there are three main reasons why students and faculty do not want this appointment, didn't want this appointment to go through. One is that is the idea of the university autonomy and how this basically damages the university's autonomy. Second is the new rector is a member of the Justice and Development Party, and he actually ran for parliamentary elections and lost. According to Turkey's higher education law, a faculty member can be a member of a party, but academic administrators like rectors, head of departments, and deans cannot. And finally, although the new rector has academic degrees, he doesn't have the credentials to become a faculty member at Boğaziçi, let alone be its rector. So moreover, after his appointment, his degrees and his graduate work became under scrutiny, and people find in his dissertation and thesis extended copy and paste paragraphs from other scholars in his field. So students met by riot police on the first day of their protest, and later on the riot police used pepper gas, rubber bullets to stop protests, and blockaded the university to prevent the students from entering to the campus. So in the protest, over 560 students were detained. Dozens of students were placed under house arrest and arrested for preventing the police from doing their jobs and inciting hatred in society and so forth. In this, and the students became really the target of defamation by the government. For instance, the LGBTQ community, the student community, which were in the forefront of the protests, were, called as perverts. There has been a lot of mobilizing the narratives of religious populism and nationalist sort of ideas to basically shore up AKP's support in the society. They call them terrorists, they call them perverts. So I think this image captures well the symbolic significance of the president's appointment, and the police state that he has built to back his many other this and many other unpopular decisions. So the faculty members have been as I said, daily protesting, but this is not a new phenomena, that president appointing a rector and this causing a protest. What is interesting in the Boğaziçi case, I believe, is that the protests have been going on, and they have been the most vocal so far. But this is really something that has been going on in a series of government practices that undermine and destroy the autonomy of universities and bring them to heel, if you like. But no other institution, as I said, resisted this much. My colleague Elif Babil and I wrote a piece on this, and it was published in the Middle East Research and Information Project's website, where we analyzed the Boğaziçi protests in the wider and historical context of Turkey. So if you're interested, please check it out. And Middle East Report Merit also co-sponsors this talk. And I think, I mean, to start with, Boğaziçi really gives us some insights into the issues that we're dealing with in the Turkish context, like as I said, the control over universities, the government's sort of effort to really bring them to heel. But I want to step back a little bit and talk about this. The relationship between the university and authoritarianism, and in the context of this expansion that I referred to earlier. So, excuse me, I have two screens that I'm trying to deal with. Okay, so Turkey witnessed a striking increase in the size of its higher education in the last 2 decades. In 2002, there were 76 universities, 53 public, and 23 foundation. And these foundation universities are basically private universities, but they're non-profit because the constitution, Turkey's constitution, do not allow for-profit motive in universities. So, but there are many ways that universities became in this process profitable. I mean, we can talk about it later. I don't want to go into that at the moment. So, so in this number, 76 in 2002, increased to 206 in 2020. With 130 public institutions and 76 foundation. And when we look at the change in university students, the size of the number of university students, Turkey had 1.7 million students in 2002, and now we're talking about 8 million students, and this only, I mean, 300% increase, only against 26% increase in the population. And when you look at Turkey in relation to other countries, we see Turkey is educating at the moment 10% of its population in tertiary education, and if you see for Germany, this is about 3.5%. In US, this is about 6%. So Turkey is really training a lot of its age group, keeping them in the universities. For the sake of going a little bit faster, I'm gonna skip here. Sorry. Okay. Okay, and this expansion was facilitated by economic growth. Turkey grew significantly between 2002 and 2010, reaching a peak in 2013. So now we're in a kind of economic crisis since 2018, but I think it's good to know that this expansion really took place in this economic growth period. Okay, so this extraordinary expansion in higher education overlapped with the increasing authoritarianism. I want to give you a little background on Turkey's democratic decline. There's a lot of literature on where it started. I like to take it from the 2000 constitutional referendum. This referendum introduced modifications to Turkey's authoritarian 1982 constitution made by the military leaders, merged with some democratic changes. It also passed the laws to restructure the judiciary, opening path to the AKP to pack the courts. The second is, I think, the Gezi protests are very significant. The government crackdown, peaceful protests, and this really, I think, was a moment where the AKP realized that it's not just the old guard, the secularist establishment that could bring them down, but also the society may, through popular protests as they happen in the Middle East around the same time or slightly before, they could also topple down his regime. So this created, like, 2013 protests, and the way the government responded to it really signify this increasing existential threats to the AKP. The third is the June 15th, 2015 June elections, and this is the time that AKP lost its parliamentary power, parliamentary majority, which instead of going to form coalition government, they decided to go and redo the elections in November. And this, in this period also, the government ended the peace process with the PKK. And between two elections is like one of the darkest periods in Turkey's recent history. We see the rise of very aggressive and expansionist militarism, not only within Turkey, but in Syria and outside Turkey. And the fourth point is the 2016 coup attempt and the state of emergency law. The failed coup represented, in Erdogan's word, very memorable, I think, is a gift from God, and it really served as a pretext to establish emergency rule and consolidate his power. During the emergency state of emergency, there were wide ranging purges of civil servants, university professors, and bureaucrats, and so on. And the regime closed down and expropriated nearly 200 broadcast and print media outlets, jailed hundreds of journalists and opposition MPs, although the jailing of opposition MPs started before the coup attempt. And the state of emergency was renewed 6 times in 2 years, and really gave Erdogan the opportunity to achieve his ambitions to replace replace country's parliamentary system. During the state of emergency, we had the 2017 constitutional referendum, and this was, as my colleague Aslı Bali calls it, the constitutional coup that ended the system of parliamentary government that characterized Turkish Republic since its foundation, replacing it with an executive presidency that undermines the separation of powers and imposes almost no checks on the president, except this, periodic elections, which are increasingly manipulated. Okay. So, for this research, to give you a little theoretical background, to explain my line of thinking. First of all, economic growth. I mean, in theory, there's a sort of understanding that economic growth leads to improvements in education, and then leads to democratization. So this is like the general sort of modernization idea of connecting the economic growth to democratization. We know that recent history complicated this understanding and contradicted its assumptions. We now know, most strikingly from the case of China, the link between economic growth and liberal democracy is weak. and greater wealth might contribute to stability, but not always to political freedom. So I am in conversation with Boyna de Mesquita and Downs' paper in this paper, and it's an interesting conversation because they argue that the lag between economic growth and democratization is related to growing sophistication of authoritarian leaders to limit coordination among the opposition. And they talk about some coordination goods, which include human rights, political rights, and press freedom, but they also include access to higher education. And they believe, by limiting these goods, the authoritarian leaders really limit dissemination of information, forming ideas, as well as raising, opposition politicians through universities. So Turkish case is, as I said, is really challenging this idea that authoritarian leaders should limit access to higher education. And I think the case of China is really interesting to sort of giving us some insights about how to think about this relationship. And in this part of the paper, I'm in conversation with Elizabeth Perry's work. And her work is really interesting in a sense that she asked why universities have been so quiet in the post-Tiananmen period since 1989. She says that this is very sort of historically contradictory, because like China always had these generations, student generations, and student generation mobilization that had political consequences. And it's also contradictory in a way that in other parts of China, like Taiwan and Hong Kong, students do still protest, and the universities are still homes to political mobilization and protest. So she asked why is the case, I mean, in China proper, that's not the case. And she talks about various methods of political control in the university, including peer surveillance, guidance counselors, mental screening for political control and punishment, again, like internet and social media surveillance, military training and political education, as well as these youth, government organized youth organizations which channel youth energy to non-political causes, if you like. And then she also talks about how this generous funding from the state really created these dependencies in universities. And these are based on state-set research agendas. So universities and faculty members had to comply because of this dependency. Okay. Sorry. So how are we doing in terms of time?
Maybe 5 to 8 more minutes.
Okay. So I conceptualize the university in this project as a state infrastructure for authoritarian control and consolidation. This is, of course, not one of the functions of the university as we talk about it in this country, but I think in the Turkish case, it makes sense to conceptualize it this way to understand the relationship. And I benefit from Slater and Fenner's article, State Power and Staying Power. They talk about infrastructural mechanism and authoritarian durability. And they talk about, these infrastructures are good for extracting resources, cultivating dependence, registering citizens, and coercing rivals. So I looked at these mechanisms and how they work within Turkish universities. And let me. So when you look at this sort of recent expansion, we see when the AKP came to power in 2002, they had this promise of building a university in every city, and this was very much for them a tool for urban and regional development. Building universities will give life to the construction sector. It will create jobs. It will help them distribute contracts. So it will really fuel this patronage system with resources. And we see that in many, and we see that very prominently in this expansion, how university is considered as a place to create these resources and to sort of fuel these patronage networks. Not only, as I said, how these contracts are distributed, but also who come to serve as faculty, and which companies have to take over or take on the roles of like maintenance of these universities. And because this is all done through the state, the states, I mean the Council of Higher Education especially, cultivate these dependencies. So I talk about these extracting resources and cultivating dependence under the same title. But there's also registering citizens and coercing rivals. And I look at the recent academic purges, imprisonment of students, like all these policies that really end progressive ideas and progressive practices in universities. I think when you look at it, you can see how universities gradually are really taken under control, with the university administrations very much complying with the government's impositions. Okay, so I think I prepared my slides more than I needed, but perhaps lastly, I can give you some data about academic freedom index in Turkey, both historically and comparatively. This is an index put together by a Global Public Institute, Policy Institute, and Scholars at Risk. And when you look at this, Turkey is in the bottom category with China and places like United Arab Emirates. The data is interesting also in terms of historically, and this is, I think, the first data that really gives us the comparative and historical aspects of this thing. And when you look at this, you can see like the situation with academic freedom and cultural expression is not new in Turkey. This dip is not new. I mean, there are historically these times, for instance, in the 20s and 30s, during the single party period, that we see academic freedoms are down. Again, in 60s, right after the military coup, there's a dip, another dip in 71 military coup, and then the biggest dip in the right after the 80 coup, which is almost similar to now that the one that we're experiencing. And this really shows us like it is possible to, and I think it's a really important insight that we can read the history of academic freedoms and institutional academic autonomy in Turkey in relation to the regime types. And in the paper, I will basically go into detail about how these two things are related over the history, with some comparison, especially of the 70s and the recent period. So to summarize, and I want to use this, I want to end my talk with this image that is very emblematic of the level of autocratic control over universities now. It's the handcuffed university, which is taken behind the first picture that I show you. These are the gates of the Boğaziçi University. So to summarize, the striking expansion of higher education went hand in hand with the increasing authoritarianism and increasing control of universities. While this contradicted the conventional approaches to higher education and universities as the enemy of authoritarian regimes, I explained the ways in which it helped the Justice and Development Party in Turkey in conversation with some of the work that I mentioned. I used the mechanisms that they the infrastructural mechanism as a way of thinking about the state power and infrastructural mechanism to think about the function of the universities and the role of universities in this context. There are a lot of problems with this expansion in terms of quality decline that I didn't have time, but we can talk about it in Q&A. And I think reversing these trends, like the control over the university and the declining quality, will be very difficult to reverse in the short run. I think universities' problems are bigger than universities' problems, but I think what role they play in the making of today's Turkey and how they could help in the efforts of restoring democracy are important questions that require, I think, more systematic thinking and research. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ayça, for this talk. We have a few questions, but before we get to them, just let everyone know, if you have questions, please type them into the Q&A box. And if you are a CDDRL affiliate, let me know if you're interested in unmuting to ask your question directly. Otherwise, I'll just be reading the questions as they come in. And the first one is from Marcus Koulanakis, who's asking about the rise in the number of students in Turkey over the past several years. Do you have either absolute or relative data on how many of those students engage in exchange programs and study abroad? And do you think that has any kind of effect on their political support for the regime?
I don't have data on that, but I guess the assumption is that maybe with globalization they will be less inclined to they will be less compliant with the regime. I'm not sure. I don't have the data, but I think it's an interesting question. But what I can say is like in Turkey as well as in China, I think that's a really interesting comparison. The expansion of the universities also overlapped with the sort of this move, this push towards globalization. Like both countries really emphasize to make a couple of their universities as like global universities, and they're like investing a lot of funding into this. In Turkey, it's more new. There are new projects of like selecting certain universities as top universities, research universities, and then investing in them. But in China, they have been going on. So there's a lot of globalization. But what's interesting for me is like this globalization also like happening at the same time that the government is emphasizing nationalization of universities. For instance, when you look at the President Erdogan's speeches, it's all about, like he's really complaining about how universities are strangers to the society. So there's a lot of emphasis on like building this homegrown university, but it's all like very contradictory, expansion, globalization, but also like homegrownness, like how would they work? I mean, it's almost like like a very contradictory and project. So I think I'm looking forward to sort of teasing out these trends, not only in this course, but actually what's happening in the universities themselves, to see, how globalization or these global, partnerships affect. But one thing maybe I can say is that Boğaziçi University, for instance, is I think the top ranking university in Turkey, which has these global partnership. Part of it is like many of its faculty, have graduate degrees from the top US and European institutions, so they have those connections. So it's one of the most global institutions in the higher education system in Turkey. But I'm interested to know more about those global partnerships and how they affect the sort of political tendency within universities and students.
Okay, great. Well, we have a lot of questions along those lines. So one question from Hisham, our colleague at CDDRL who runs the Arab Reform and Democracy program. Hisham Salam is asking if there are any relevant trends on ties between university-based activism and established political parties and movements. And that's similar to a question from Steve Krasner about other sources of opposition to the AKP, both in and outside universities. Could you speak more to those?
Okay, I mean, we know that the AKP is a party that is really pursuing mobilizing people in every layer of the society. I'm not aware of like, the AKP branch of a university, but there are like AKP's youth organization is very, very organized, very powerful. They're investing a lot of energy in youth mobilization. But I'm not aware of like, like university branches of the AKP. I'm sure there are students who are organizing their friends and bringing them to the party, right? But I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay.
I locked my dog in a room and then she escaped. So so sorry about that. And about Stephen's question, can you
what other sources of opposition or resistance are there to the AKP, either in or outside of universities?
Okay. Well, there are opposition parties, right? I mean, they're in the parliament. They're very vocal, although the parliament really lost its significance in the Turkish political system now. They are very vocal about, and they are monitoring the government, and they're very vocal critics of the government. I mean, and there are civil societies, although they are very much repressed at the moment. There's a environment of fear, but people still like oppose the government. I mean, just with this Boğaziçi protest, they have been going for 2 months. I mean, 2 months of protesting, and I know there's a lot of pressure on them from the government, but it doesn't seem that they will stop soon, and I can't really say what will happen at the end. But this shows, like, despite all that pressure and repression, there is still like a lot of opposition in the society. And I mean, the government is losing its support. And the one thing that happened, for instance, last year during the local elections, is that the opposition parties were able to come together and agree on one candidate, which got the main opposition party, Republican People's Party, to win Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, 3 big cities in Turkey, which is a great success. But of course, the government, seeing this like coming together of the opposition, doing everything it can to divide the opposition. And one card that they always play is this Kurdish vote, Kurdish, like Kurds, like when they speak to this like national sentiment by using Kurds, sort of, portraying them as, terrorists or so on. They are in a way trying to weaken the opposition's ability to come together. But we will see to what extent they can achieve that.
Okay. All right, we're going to try to have Larry Diamond speak next. Larry.
Then unmuted myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So Ayça, thank you so much for this. I have a question about intellectual freedom, analytic freedom for professors, and particularly social science professors, and most especially those who are dealing with politics. Since I edit a journal of democracy, I see a lot of material that comes in, and we get a lot of submissions from Turkey, and many of them are pretty candid in talking about what's happening and analyzing it very forcefully. So I'm wondering how that jives with the image of Turkey as, a country in the red zone in terms of intellectual freedom. Mm-hmm. My sense is that this may be the case with press freedom as well, that sometimes when the boundaries aren't known and they're ambiguous because you have what's called a competitive authoritarian regime, it can seem like it's among the most repressive when in fact it's very repressive, but ambiguous in some ways. So maybe you could speak to that or clarify it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how they put together that index. I like it because there are not that many. I mean, that information is hard to find historically and comparatively globally. But I know that there are a lot of social scientists in Turkey still writing critically about the regime and the government practices. I think when you look at the laws there, I mean, this recent sort of changes in the higher education law and the president, before from 1990 to 1990s to 2016 coup attempt and the state of emergency, actually there was a system where the universities were selecting, voting, doing elections for their presidents, and then they would send those lists of candidates according to their rank in the election to the higher education. Then higher education was sent it to, I mean, the presidents were always like sort of appointed by the president, but there was like this university process. So these are the things I think that the index takes and say, okay, there's no more elections. That brings down the Turkey's ranking and all that. But and also, like, we know there were these really widespread purges, like many people, for instance, the Academics for Peace, who were against this, Turkish state's policy in the Kurdish region. I mean, they were purged. I mean, like 400 academics were basically were persecuted and all that. They're now like outside the university. They're still producing. I mean, I was going to, if I had time, refer to some of these academic groups who are still working and producing, but they are still, I mean, they're outside the university. And there are also like some, protections within private universities like Koç, Sabancı, and even the public universities. I mean, Boğaziçi, I think people are careful about what they say in public, what they write, but still they do it critically. And also, I don't think the Turkish government has the mechanisms to read everything and surveil everything. So a lot of things go under their radar, especially if you write in English. I mean, the state of these new universities show that there's not much human capital to consolidate that regime that they're trying to do in every institution, in the universities, in the Council of Higher Education. But there's a lot of, I mean, I think pressure. Like, I mean, just give you one example. When I was doing this higher education research back in the early 2000s, I had to go to the Council of Education and conducted interviews there. And one of the things that I encountered was like, when I went to interview the current president for this research, the first thing I was told was like, "You're not a feminist, right?" Like, you know, like there's a lot of like control and like telling you what you can say and what you can't. But I understand. I mean, I think social scientists are also trying to do their best to, you know, express their complaints as well as analyze what's going on. So I understand why you get a lot of submissions to the Journal of Democracy. So yeah.
Okay, so we have plenty of other questions. Thank you everyone for these wonderful questions. And we'll try to get to as many as we can. But another from Salma Musa, one of our postdocs, is how should we think about different control mechanisms that the regime might be using? For example, not only appointing cronies to leadership positions, like in Bozachi, like you described, but also changes to curricula in public schools to reflect more religious content. How do you sort of place what's happening in universities in the broader context of educational reforms?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the university administrations are very powerful, and I said they're really monitoring students. There are a lot of students now in jail in Turkey, but the ones who are not jail, they go through this like university disciplinary mechanisms, and they're punished, like, you know, so there's a lot of like control and punishment, and university administrations are really playing this very prominent role in that. The other thing is like the expansion of higher education, the expansion of religious education. One of the biggest increases among the you know, new universities and new departments is the religious religious schools, divinity schools, basically. And this is not only among the university, but also we have seen a huge expansion of religious secondary schools in Turkey. So these are the kind of the mechanisms that really raising, you know, young people with what they call this like homegrown and nationalist and pious sort of consciousness. But it's also like, I mean, behind that ideology, we see a lot of these networks working, like are also patronage networks, and really strengthening or solidifying the base. But I should also say, I mean, I perhaps just to give you a little hopeful note, I mean, the young people is also a biggest challenge to the AKP at the moment. Despite all this like ideological sort of inculcation, like punishments, etc. I mean, the AKP is like super worried about the young people's vote. I mean, the next election will have 5 million new people, young people voting. And what is really significant when we look back to AKP's electoral base, I mean, electoral support, young people do not, I mean, are less inclined to vote for the AKP. And all this, like, I mean, because I study youth politics, I see a lot of like effort trying to really bring young people to party, but I don't think it is necessary. It hasn't been that successful, and I don't think it will be that successful now because, you know, given the economic crisis, given the protests, given the opposition trying to find a way to work together, I think it will be much more difficult. I don't think there's that much of hope for the AKP among young people, and yeah.
Okay, so to continue on that line, there's a question here about all these new college students entering a job market that is suffering job losses. So there's also a question about some universities that have been closed and whether or not this backlash to the AKP's decision to appoint cronies to Bozici is a backlash that the administration had anticipated. So, or the regime, that is. So the question is, what's going to happen if college students face dwindling job prospects? And how will the economic situation combined with all of these new young voters affect opposition to the AKP?
Yeah. I mean, I had actually slides that show the number of unemployed young people. I mean, it's like a huge you know, population that are neither in education nor in work. They're basically like, you know, the government numbers, I mean, it's hard to get the numbers first of all, but there are like officially around like 30%, but it's probably higher, and that's a real big problem. And many of these unemployed people, I mean, are university graduates, right? With this expansion in the last 10, 20 years, we see the number of unemployed university students really exploded. I mean, like before, like if you finish a university, you will, of course, would get a job, but now that's not the case. So I think it's a big problem for the government, and I think it's one of the sort of obstacles in the sort of the authoritarian durability in Turkey, the economic crisis and the prospects of these people. And there's a lot of people who are trying to leave the country. According to last surveys, like, you know, over 70% say that they just want to leave and live in another country. So that's like a huge brain drain that has been going on for some time, but it seems that it will continue. I mean, as much as people can do it. In terms of anticipating the backlash, I think there wasn't too much of a backlash when the government closed universities, because those universities were somehow affiliated with the Gülen community, Gülen Cemaat. This is a business religious network, and the government thought they were behind the coup attempt in 2016, so declared this organization as a terrorist organization. So whoever comes out to sort of protest that will be put in jail. So there hasn't been much of a protest of closing of these institutions, but I know that many, I mean, their faculty and students were basically displaced, right? And they had no relationship whatsoever to coup attempts. So there are many people who were just lost their jobs and in the process. And but the atmosphere is not good for them to vocalize their protest. But the Academics for Peace is one organization of purged academics who is very vocal, not only in terms of politically, but also like producing research that sheds light on these recent developments in Turkey. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the final question is just going to be about what you were ending your discussion on, about the quality of education in Turkey and the fact that there's been some kind of decline with respect to quality captured by international rankings. If you could just say a little bit more about why that's the case and whether you think that will contribute to ongoing problems you were talking about, like brain drain.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge problem now. I mean, with all that expansion, it's really like, it's really hard to find human resources like faculty, trained faculty to fill those positions. It's not only the academic stuff, but also like the facilities are very poor, not just, you know, public universities, but also like the private universities. Like there is now a sort of a term in Turkey to indicate the hallowness of this new private universities, which is called signage universities, just a sign, nothing else. And they don't have the infrastructure basically to educate people, right? And one of the interesting actually research which showed at the moment, like 70 rectors in Turkey, like 70 presidents of universities, they don't have an international academic publication. Like this is a huge number out of 200. And the ones that they have, they don't have any citation. So this is like, and there is a correlation. This research shows like the, you know, academic credentials of the administrators and the success of the universities. So I mean, the human resources, the, you know, the facilities, but also like the pressure, the political control about what you can say and what you can't. I mean, one thing that is really, really, I think, damaging academic freedom in Turkey is that there is a hotline to the president that anyone can just like sit down on a computer and complain about the professor. And so the university professors are very, very scared of like talking about, I mean, if you're a political science professor and if you can't talk about the political regime in your country, then what do you really teach, right? So, and that really degrades the quality of the education and academic freedoms and all that.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Ayça, for this wonderful presentation. And again, for updates on the program on Turkey, you can find it online at the CDDRL website. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're going to have 2 more seminars after this, and then we'll close out winter quarter. Thank you so much, Ayça.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the questions.
Thanks.